If you haven't written your first sentence yet, this will be the best video of your life. And if you have written it, then this video is going to help you make it better. These 15 strategies to write your first sentence aren't the ones you've heard before. And I'm also not drawing from the usual suspects because, hey, although, call me a schmeal is great, I think you deserve some fresh examples. Let's start right off with number 1, deliberately cryptic. Sometimes you want to create a mystery with the first sentence just to draw the reader into the book. Let's look at The Orphan's Tale by Pam Jenoff. The first sentence is, "They will be looking for me by now." This sentence is great because we don't know who they is, we don't know who me is, and then we also have this ticking clock of the by now. What does the by now refer to? Another example would be from Jonathan Letham's You Don't Love Me Yet. His first sentence is, "They met at the museum to end it." So we have a mysterious they, who are these two people, and also we have mysterious it. What is the it that they are ending? So to write a deliberately cryptic first sentence, follow these 3 rules. 1, you want pronouns. Pronouns instead of proper names keep things a little bit more mysterious. Also, it's best if you have 2 pronouns or 2 people in the pronouns because then you have a little bit of tension between these 2 characters. The second rule is keep it short. Notice that both of these examples are very short sentences, and that's because if you write too long of a sentence, the reader's going to be confused rather than feel their interest piqued. And the third rule is make sure it's a dynamic situation. In the first example, we see a search going on. In the second example, we see this very ominous meeting. And hey, just a reminder, if you need more help with writing your book, check out my course, Write Your Best Novel, where I take you through the beginning, the middle, and the end of writing your novel. You can get that as a standalone course, or you can purchase all of Bookfox Academy together, which is all my courses. As always, the link is in the description. A second rule for the first sentence of your book is foreshadowing plus event. This is the first of a couple of double strategies I'm going to roll out, and it's because alone these aren't good strategies, but it's when you combine them that it actually makes for a great first sentence. Let's look at Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. All the dying that summer began with the death of a child. A boy with golden hair and thick glasses, killed on the railroad tracks outside New Bremen, Minnesota. So what's the foreshadowing in this sentence? All the dying that summer. So that is promising there's going to be a lot more death in this novel, right? This was the first death, but it's not going to be the last death. But Kruger's really smart not to stop there. He combines that with a specific event, the event of what is the first child dying? How does that happen? Which gets us interested in that particular story. So if you were trying to imitate Kruger, what's a bad way to write this sentence? One would be just focus on the foreshadowing. There was a lot of death that summer. I mean, okay, it's okay. A second bad way would be to just focus on the event. A boy was killed on the tracks. It's when you combine those 2 things, the foreshadowing and the event, that your story will really accelerate forward. And trust me, this strategy is used all the time. Just so you know, I'm not making this up, look at John Green's Looking for Alaska. The week before I left my family and Florida and the rest of my minor life to go to boarding school in Alabama, my mother insisted on throwing me a going away party. So we have the foreshadowing, in a week, I'm gonna go on a trip, but we also have the event that starts it, the going away party thrown by the mother. Let's move on to strategy number 3, which is action plus tension. For this example, we're gonna look at Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley. The first sentence is, I was surprised to see a white man walk into Joppy's bar. So you might have heard that there are only 2 forms of stories. A person leaves town and goes on an adventure, or a stranger comes to town. That's a little bit too simplistic of a reduction to me, but in any case, this would be the latter example of, hey, stranger coming to town. Now, what makes this example so great is that it is action paired with tension. A bad way to write this first sentence would be, a man walked into Joppy's bar. Now that gives you action, right? Like, oh, there's movement happening, like a new person is coming in, but there is no tension. The tension in this sentence is that someone's out of place. This guy's like, what's this white man doing here? Like, you don't belong here sort of thing. The action plus low grade tension is a fantastic way to start a story. Now, this fourth strategy is probably recommended less often, maybe because it's harder to teach, but I still think it's really valuable. It's number 4, set the table. So a set the table strategy is just a good way to prepare the reader to read the book. Often, this is really a good strategy if you're writing a book that has a little bit more world building in it. So let's look at Jeff Vandermeer's book, Born. I found Born on a sunny gunmetal day when the giant bear Mord came roving near our home. There is so much information packed into this sentence. 1, it gives you a sense of the genre. It is a fantastical genre because, you know, there's this gigantic bear with a name. 2, I think using a word word like gunmetal to describe the day in the very first sentence tips you off that this is going to lean a little bit more toward the literary, even though it is, the genre of fantastical. And second, this very first sentence introduces us to the three principal characters. We have the I, who is the narrator. We have this creature Born, which he has just found. And then we have the antagonist, the giant bear Mord. So this first sentence does a wonderful job at setting the table by introducing us to the complexities of the genre and by introducing all the main characters. That is a lot of information packed into a single sentence. This fifth strategy is sort of a classic. It is start with the inciting incident. For an example of this, let's look at Frederick Bachman's Beartown. Late one evening, toward the end of March, a teenager picked up a double-barreled shotgun, walked into the forest, put the gun to someone else's forehead, and pulled the trigger. What I love about this sentence is all the details that we are getting. We know the time. It is late one evening, it is March. We get adjectives like not just a shotgun, but a double-barreled shotgun. We get the place, like we know this is a forest. Fourth, we get the detail that it was someone else's forehead. So we know this wasn't someone offing themselves, that there was another person in the picture. So even though it's giving a ton of details about what actually happened, it's still preserving the mystery because we want to know more details. We're still curious about what exactly happened here. Another example of an inciting incident in the first sentence would be World War Z by Max Brooks. The first outbreak I saw was in a remote village that officially had no name. So what are the two most important words in this first sentence? One, it's first, because we're not only getting the first outbreak, but it implies that there are a lot more outbreaks later on down the line. The second, I think, would probably be remote, because it gives us a sense like, oh, the very first outbreaks happened in a really remote part of the world, and then it spread from there. If you have a really big event to start your novel, it's a good idea not to put it on page 3 or page 7, but to actually put it in the very first sentence. Yes, you can do that, and maybe you should do that. A sixth wonderful strategy for your very first sentence would be establish the theme. Let's look at the YA novel Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. Ecstasy was no good for drowning out the morons at the back of the bus. This first sentence does a wonderful job establishing what the content of the whole rest of the book is going to be. There's a lot of music in this book, so it starts with the very first sentence mentioning a band, Ecstasy. Plus, the novel contains a lot of conflict with their fellow classmates, so the very first sentence is about, talking about the morons at the back of the bus. And then 3, it establishes that this is YA, right? They're at the back of the bus, so we know, oh, these are, high school students going to school. If in your novel you can hit at some of the main topics that you're going to cover for the entire rest of the book, your first sentence will hook the reader. It will tell them, it will promise them exactly what's going to come, and they'll be like, okay, I'm on board for this. The seventh strategy is dress it up with metaphor. This is kind of like a low-key, small-timey strategy, which I think can pay a lot of dividends if you are writing a certain type of book. No, starting with a metaphor isn't like a flashy, inciting incident sort of start, but I do think it gives a lot of layers and depth to your novel that will make it really rewarding for people to read, say, a second time. Let's look at Louise Erdrich's The Round House. Her very first sentence is, small trees had attacked my parents' house at the foundation. This seems like you're starting with really low stakes, like, is this book going to be about landscaping and house troubles? But as it turns out, she is talking about the rest of the novel in code. This book is about the crumbling of a family by attacking its base. And so with the very first sentence, she's preparing you psychologically for what's going to happen in the rest of the story, even though she's not directly talking about what's going to happen. It's a little bit slower of an opening, but it is a very deep and rich opening. So I'd really encourage you, can you think of a metaphor that might apply for the main conflict that's going on in your book, the main plot line? If so, consider writing a first sentence that reflects that in a metaphorical way. I love this 8th example. It is a fantastic one, and it is dramatic irony. This one comes from Brandon Sanderson's Elantris. Prince Raoden of Aurelon awoke early that morning, completely unaware that he had been damned for all eternity. So dramatic irony, if you recall that term from high school English classes, is just when the reader knows something that the characters don't know. So we know, oh, this guy's in deep trouble, right? Damned for all eternity. But he does not know that. So we read looking forward, expecting the moment when he actually discovers that. And as a little side note, I will also say that with that name, pretty sure that establishes the genre. We are not reading a detective novel or a romance novel with that kind of name. Yeah, it's fantasy. Oh, it's fantasy. This next strategy is a little bit of an inversion of a one you've probably heard. It is number 9, expose a secret. I see so many writers trying to create a secret in the very first sentence of their novel. And that's not necessarily a bad technique, but I think what Stephen King does in this example is an inversion of that technique. This is from Stephen King's novel, The Outsider. It was an unmarked car, just some nondescript American sedan a few years old, but the black wall tires and the 3 men inside it gave it away for what it was. So at the beginning of the sentence, we have a secret. By the end of the sentence, the narrator is saying like, we know what it is. I love that it doesn't say what it is, but it lets the reader guess. And if you're guessing that these are actually cops inside the car, you would be correct. Now, the sentence could have begun just by describing the car, but the trouble with that is there's no tension, right? It's a car. Now I know what the car looks like. And I love the undercurrent of secrecy going on here. These are people who are trying to hide in an unmarked car, but they have been noticed. This next strategy is one you've probably used inside your book, but I bet you've never thought about using it for your first sentence. It is number 10, a ticking clock. Let's look at The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest by Stieg Larsson, which is the 3rd book in the Lisbeth Salander trilogy. Dr. Jonasson was woken by a nurse 5 minutes before the helicopter was expected to land. So what's great about this first sentence? It introduces a ticking clock right at the very beginning. 5 minutes before a helicopter lands. Now, I guarantee you, if you are a reader reading that very first sentence, you are not going to stop reading until the helicopter lands and you know, like, what is this helicopter coming for? Who is on this helicopter? What is this helicopter carrying? I think this is a much better strategy than starting with a helicopter already arriving, because it buys you this certain amount of time where the reader has this expectation, oh, a helicopter is coming. I'm certainly going to keep reading until I get to that point. So anytime you want to start your novel with 5 minutes before, or 1 hour before, or 1 day before, or 1 week before, that is a fantastic way to keep the reader on the line until you get to the next event. This 11th strategy is a real humdinger. It is past that illuminates the present. So for most of your books, the present moment story is the one that's going to occupy most of the space in your novel. But what if you need to go into the past to establish something before you get to the present moment story? And really, this is the logic of prologues. This is how prologues work, is because the author thinks, oh, I need to establish this thing that happened in the past before I go on to tell the present moment. Now, a lot of people hate prologues for that exact reason. They're like, why do you gotta start with that? I actually want what's going on in the present. But, you know, there is a room for prologues in certain genres, and there's decent reasons to use prologue-like chapters, even if you don't call it a prologue. Let's look at John Irving's book, The World According to Garp. The first sentence is, Garp's mother, Jenny Fields, was arrested in Boston in 1942 for wounding a man in a movie theater. So pay really close attention to the first 2 words, Garp's mother, because what that does is it ties the title to this person. Because if you just start with Jenny Fields, everyone's like, who's Jenny Fields? I thought this book was going to be about Garp. But by saying Garp's mother, we realize, oh, okay, this book is going into the past, and it gives us an expectation that this will connect in some way with the present moment story about Garp. So if you're going to talk about the past at the beginning of your novel, it's a good idea to, as soon as possible, make sure the reader can tell how this could possibly connect with the story that's going to take place for the main part of the book. And my other piece of advice with this is notice that the past event is something that's really surprising and exciting. You got violence, it feels very dynamic, and you also have a little bit of mystery of how and why she wounded this man in a movie theater. The one danger I'd caution against is make sure that your backstory or prologue isn't more exciting than your present moment story. That'll get you into trouble because the reader will be like, I kind of wanted more of that old story rather than the story you're telling me. A 12th strategy you should absolutely consider for your very first sentence is establish the narrator. Let's look at the first line of Annie Proulx's The Shipping News. Here is an account of a few years in the life of Quoyle, born in Brooklyn and raised in the shuffle of dreary upstate towns. So you're probably saying like, okay, John, a lot of the other examples you give, I can see why they would be a good first sentence. But this one? This one seems a little dreary. This one seems a little boring, and I can definitely forgive you for thinking that. But you know what this first sentence does do? Is it tells you, hey, here is a storyteller. It introduces a very high omniscient voice narrator that is like, let me give you a broad account of this man's life. So it's communicating you the type of storyteller that is going to be telling this story, a very high omniscient narrator. And it's also trying to convince you that, hey, I'm trustworthy. I know everything about this dude's life, and so you should go on this journey with me. Is something like this hard to pull off? Well, I mean, yeah, this isn't a beginner level strategy, but I do think if you have an unusual narrator, establishing the identity of the narrator right off the bat is a good way to just introduce readers to the world of your book. We got 3 more, and these are some of the best ones. Let's look at 13, deep characterization. To learn about deep characterization, we're going to be looking at the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. So I'm not going to read this all out loud. You can read it on your own, but basically there's 3 parts to this very long opening sentence. And those 3 stages correspond to the 3 levels of this man's life. Right now he's this cool, legendary guy called Mazer. But before that, he was just some Jewish dude. And then before that, he was just a kid who enjoyed playing video games. Now, I know this is a very long sentence. It's a very complex sentence, but man, it really introduces you to so much of this man's life in the very first sentence. It accomplishes so much. It shows his background as a Jewish kid. It shows his love for video games. It shows that he's some sort of legendary figure in the present moment. And if you can write a first sentence in your novel that makes us feel like we know a character after the first sentence, you should absolutely do it. This 14th example you might laugh at, but I actually think it's a very solid one. It is a small physical event. For an example of this, let's look at Robin Sloan's Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. The very first sentence says, "Lost in the shadows of the shelves, I almost fall off the ladder." So to use this strategy, in the very first sentence of your book, you would take your main character and have a little physical tragedy happen to them. Maybe they trip, maybe they fall, maybe they get hit by a baseball, maybe they sneeze, maybe they hiccup, maybe they cut their finger while chopping vegetables. But by starting with a little small physical action happening, you start with a little bit of a problem, right? And problems exist so characters can solve them. It launches us immediately into the book. It gets us sympathizing with this character, like, oh, too bad that little problem happened to you. And, it's a good way to start a story. Also note that with this first sentence, the small physical problem has to do with these enormous bookshelves that he has to climb on a ladder to service. And that ties into the whole theme and content of the book as a whole. So if you can link it to the very heart of your book in some way, that's a good idea too. And the 5th and final strategy for the first sentence of your book is to start with a list. Harriet Doerr's Stones for Ibarra starts like this. In the midst of a succession of blasts, human screams, howls of dogs, police whistles, and a siren, bells began to toll for mass. I love that list. It establishes mayhem. You get all these sensory inputs, and then the sentence ends with a kind of call to order, a calming presence of the church bells tolling for mass. It's a call to order and stability out of the riotous cacophony of all the other stuff going on in the beginning of the sentence. And it's a good list. It's a list of 5 things in a row followed by the bells. Another example of this strategy is Julian Barnes' Sense of an Ending. So he starts with this list of about 8 things. I'm only listing 3 of them, but a whole bunch of things that he remembers in no particular order. And it seems to be this random assortment of things, but once you finish the book and go back to the beginning, you realize every single one of these things was absolutely crucial for the plot. So he's not starting with a meaningless list. He's foreshadowing what's going to happen, but there's no way for you to know based on these items what's going to happen. It just whets your appetite for the story that comes. I hope one of those 15 strategies helps you either write or improve the first sentence of your book. And don't forget to click on Bookfox Academy and check that out if you are not a subscriber already. Other than that, I hope your writing day goes really well today. I hope the project you're working on is working really well, and happy writing.